Yeah, no, I'm sure, yeah. I forget. I don't have it. I don't have it.
Oh my god, I need to find that girl. I need to find a YouTube video of her sleeping. I don't know if I'll be able to find her. It's really I've been like, you're like a pro, like I was like, I'm like, I was so nervous and I was outside, like, you know, my brain like just fully shut down. You
can play the
I was outside, but yeah. There, if you could I was gonna die. Okay, so you want it? Yeah, like I explained, you know, class proposal now. Like, yeah, they try to press over the discussion. So yeah, like it's a pretty mixed there. Yeah. So my previous from that university is now in yeah. So like, but I think she doesn't have any luck anymore. Like, you know, it's so complicated. Like, she really wants to go back to training, but like, there's just three of my professors who are still in our department, and they're like, you know, like that. Yeah. 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 They hire new professors.
Or you can buy them.
Yeah. Like they hired new professors who had like two of their CV as like technical skills. Even not qualified.
Alright.
Yeah. That's my new goal, yeah. I'm very but I heard she like now I like she doesn't know so like she's not
He told me, I didn't realize how serious he was.
I used to do that before.
Like, the first thing I did when I came here. He's just focused.
All right, everyone, welcome back to our last set of speakers for MiniCon. We have about 3 speakers left, but we still have some great talks, so make sure you're still paying attention and awake. We do have a lot of coffee at the back if you need that. But I think we will be excited enough by the presentations that we have today. So our next speaker kicking us off for the afternoon is Ashley Coventry. And Ashley has been an ambitious person ever since childhood, when she aimed to take full advantage of her dual citizenship by simultaneously becoming the British Prime Minister as well as the President of the United States. If she weren't in grad school, she'd perhaps be nearing those goals by going to law school. But now her goals have shifted to become a professor at an R1 university, working on close relationships, especially in underrepresented populations and mate preference, and some of that we will be hearing about today. Though Ashley doesn't consider herself bilingual, she is bi-accented, and only in high school did she successfully train herself out of speaking in her British accent, but she does slip back into the accent with words like strawberry and giraffe, and also slips back in, especially if she's angry or stressed. So we might possibly get a British Ashley today, we'll have to see. Let's welcome her down. Sorry, I didn't give you enough time to marvel at her cute baby picture.
Hi everyone, I'm here today to talk about research I've been working on mate preferences, and specifically focusing on deconfounding participant sex and partner sex in mate preference research. So, a large subset of human mating psychology specifically focuses on preferences and finds that, robust sex differences in its work. So this work from 1945 finds that men more than women prioritize things like good looks in a romantic partner, but women more than men prioritize things like ambition and financial prospects. And again, this work was done as early as 1945, but there have been large-scale cross-cultural studies of mate preferences, including David Buss's 1989 work, which was more recently replicated in 2020 by Dr. Walter, where people have preferences for things like health, kindness, and intelligence, shared between the sexes, but then there are sex differences in preferences for physical attractiveness, for financial prospects, and then differences in age choice, where men are typically preferring slightly younger partners than themselves. In this case, we measured choice here, and then women are typically choosing partners that are slightly older than themselves. And also, additionally, across all traits other than physical attractiveness, women are setting higher standards overall compared to men. And again, these findings have been repeatedly and reliably replicated across countries. But there is this unaddressed confound in mate preference research that exists, whereby previous work has been seeing these sex differences and preferences and assuming that they're driven by participant sex. However, in research with heterosexual participants, participant sex and target sex are confounded. So for example, when you're asking heterosexual men about their ideal partner preferences, you're always asking about their preferences for a woman. And when you're asking heterosexual women about their partner preferences, you are always asking about ideal preferences for a man. And so there's no way to see whether this is driven, these sex differences are driven by men and women having different psychologies, or people having different preferences for male compared to female partners. So this talk is really me focusing more on this underlying psychology and what actually is driving that. So this current work is going to use bisexual participants specifically to deconfound participant and target sex. And what I think is a clear example of how LGBT populations can be used not only in work just studying them, but also to illuminate our understanding of mating psychology as a whole. And so the question here is, why use bisexual participants? And for one, they can be asked about preferences for their ideal male and female partners, while also just being used as their own control. We can ask the same participants about both sets of preferences. And I know some of you who have read some mating preference literature may be thinking, Surely this has been done before. Bisexual participants by definition are attracted to men and women. Of course, people ask about those preferences separately, but no. People always ask bisexual participants just about their overall preference for an ideal partner. They don't specify whether that partner is male or female. So this current work is a good way to address both of these issues by getting a better understanding of bisexual mate preferences, but also getting a better understanding of mating psychology as a whole and the underlying psychology and how that works. So the research question here is, what drives ideal mate preferences? Is it exclusively one's own sex? So is it males have a distinct mating psychology than females do? Is it target sex, where there's a distinct psychology for evaluating male compared to female partners? Or is it an interaction of sex and target sex? So in study 1, we recruited 442 bisexual participants, about half female and half male, and with a mean age of about 31. And what we did was we had these participants rate their preferences separately for ideal male and ideal female partners. And we had them rate preferences for a series of traits: health, intelligence, kindness, physical attractiveness, and resources. And then we also had them rate their preferences for age on a different scale, that I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. So this is what this looks like for preferences. So for example, how financially stable should your ideal female partner romantic be, or female romantic partner be? From bottom 1 out of 100 people to top 1 out of 100 people. And we asked 2 items for each trait and then averaged them together to form a composite. And then this is how we asked about age. So how old should your ideal female or male romantic partner be in years? Ranging from bins of 20 or younger all the way up to 75 or older, which we then converted to ideal age difference relative to the participant themselves. So this is how we collected our data. I'm going to talk a bit about how we analyzed it. And we might skip a little bit through this just for the sake of time. But we started with a linear mixed effects model where we predicted trait value overall started with a 3-way interaction between target sex, participant sex, and trait with a random intercept term. But what we did was, when we found that this interaction term was not significant, we reduced the model until we only had significant interaction effects in there. And what we came up with was a model where we had this main effect of target sex and then this interaction of participant sex and trait. And I'll get into what this means for our results specifically in a second. But we did further explore this interaction of participant sex and trait by looking at this on the specific trait level. So for each trait, what we did was then predict that specific trait level from participant sex and target sex separately. I'm happy to answer any more questions about this in the discussion as well. And so what we find in study 1 is that we are replicating some established sex differences as things that are driven by participant sex. So for example, this first graph here has ideal physical attractiveness level on the y-axis and then participant sex on the x-axis. And what we find, again, consistent with prior work, is that males are reporting higher ideal levels of physical attractiveness in a romantic partner compared to females, regardless of the sex of that partner. And the beta coefficients here are based on standardized trait values, so they can be interpreted in combo beta co-indices. What we find for ideal age range difference on a slightly different scale here is that, again, consistent with prior work, females are preferring partners that are slightly older than them, and males are preferring partners that are slightly younger than them. And again, this is regardless of target sex. So these things do seem to be driven by participant sex. However, there's also a common trait that is sexually differentiated within the literature, and that is resources. And so when we use only preferences for opposite sex targets, so you're only looking at males' preferences for females and females' preferences for males, we do find this significant difference between male and female participants. So females are preferring higher levels of resources compared to males. However, when with preferences for opposite and same-sex targets incorporated together, you don't find this significant difference. So from this, it looks like resources, at least, is maybe partially driven by target sex as well as participant sex. And then we also looked at that overall main effect of target sex across all traits, but we did find that significant main effect overall. And what we find is that both male and female participants recorded higher overall preferences in evaluating male partners relative to female partners. So people just seem to have higher standards for male targets overall, which is interesting in that it seems like this is driven by target sex and not what was previously assumed as participant sex. So before I move on to study 2, I'm just going to summarize briefly. Sex differences in mate preferences, with the exception possibly of resources, do seem to be largely driven by participant sex. However, differences in overall standards seem to be driven largely by target sex, which is something previous literature we could not tell from previous work. There were some limitations of study 1 that we wanted to address with a second study. First is that bisexual men and women may be thinking about different types of male and female partners. So for example, when you ask a bisexual man about their ideal preferences for a male partner, that male partner has to be queer in some way. But that female partner could be just a straight woman interested only in men. And the same would be, the opposite would be true for female participants. And so it's possible that it's the sexual orientation of the target that might be driving these effects instead of their sex themselves. We also wanted to answer the question of whether we can actually generalize these findings to heterosexual populations. So maybe this finding is just something unique about bisexual people, and we really can't be drawing inferences overall about mating psychology here. And so to address these limitations, we ran a second study where we recruited both bisexual and heterosexual participants so that we could compare the two on their opposite sex preferences to see how similar they were. And then we had them rate their preferences for ideal partners. This for bisexual participants, ideal male and ideal female partners, and then for heterosexual participants only for their opposite sex partners. And we specified that this partner had to be bisexual, which I can answer questions about in the discussion as well, because that may come across a little awkward. But this specification allowed us to control for that different conceptions of partner sexuality there. So this is how we addressed those limitations from study 1. Otherwise, the method was basically identical. And in this sample, we recruited about half bisexual and half heterosexual participants, and half male, half female, and a sample size overall of about 380 participants. And we directly replicated the study 1 analyses with only using bisexual participants first, just to show that we could replicate the findings. So again, this is only with bisexual participants, where we have this interaction with participant sex and trait, and then the main effect of target sex. And what we did was we replicated those findings, finding that that interaction was significant again, and then that main effect again was significant. Let's talk about specific results here. We again replicate this finding that among bisexual participants, males are preferring higher levels of physical attractiveness compared to females, regardless of the target sex. And then the same is true for age, where we replicate that sex difference again. And once again, for resources, with only preferences for opposite sex targets, we do find that preferences for resources seem to be driven by participant sex, where females are preferring higher ideal levels of these resources compared to males. But when we incorporate both same and opposite sex targets, what we find is that there is no significant difference in ideal resource preferences. So interestingly, it seems like it's possible that resources, at least in part, are driven in some way by target sex. And again, replicating study 1, what we find is that there are greater preferences for male partners relative to female partners. People are holding higher standards for male partners, and these standards do seem to be driven by target sex, which again is something we would not know if we were not using bisexual participants here. So a question that we wanted to address again as a limitation of study 1 is this unique to bisexual participants? Is sexuality playing, or sexual orientation playing some sort of role here? And what we did find, that I'll talk about more specifically in a second, is a marginally significant three-way interaction of participant sex, sexual orientation, and trait on opposite sex partner preferences. We needed to restrict this to opposite sex partner preferences just because obviously heterosexual people don't have those same sex preferences. And so we do find this marginally significant effect, but when we looked at this on the trait level, we didn't find a specific trait that seemed to be driving this. So instead, I'm going to show you descriptively what these different preferences look like comparing bisexual and heterosexual participants. So I'm going to start with the main difference that we find here. We have bisexual on the left for you guys, and then heterosexual on the right, and then participant sex is color-coded. And what we find is that this preference for health seems to be swapped among bisexual and heterosexual people. So in bisexual participants, it appears that males prefer higher levels of health compared to females, but then the opposite is true among heterosexual participants. But this difference is not significant. So this is just descriptively what it seems that might be driving this marginally significant interaction. And then the rest of this looked very similar. Sex differences in particular just seem to be larger among heterosexual populations for opposite sex partners, which maybe could point towards us just being underpowered in our bisexual populations to properly detect specifically the resource effect that might also be driven by participant sex. But overall, because of how similar these are, I would argue that this should allow us to draw some inferences about our mating psychology overall from these bisexual participants. So what do we learn about mating psychology from these findings? This is going to be a little evolutionary focused, so I apologize to the non-evolutionary folks out here. But we started with this diagram where we showed that participant sex and target sex seem to be confounded in this work. And this assumption, in fact, that participant sex is what's driving these target trait preferences and these differences in standards. However, when we look at sex differences in mate preferences and overall standards, what we find is that sex differences do seem to be largely driven by participant sex, but it's overall standards that seem to be driven by target sex. And I think the takeaway here is that there are multiple routes to the same functional or observed outcome. When you're studying heterosexual populations and you're observing these sex differences, there are multiple ways that these sex differences could occur. So one route is that participant sex is driving these trait preferences and standards, such that you have males and females with these sexually dimorphic psychologies that interact in a mating environment and then produce these sexually dimorphic outcomes. However, another way that this could come about is that males and females share a sexually monomorphic psychology. And then they're just interacting in a sexually dimorphic context, with males evaluating female partners if they're heterosexual and females evaluating male partners. And it's this sexually dimorphic context that drives this sexually dimorphic mating behavior. And so both of these routes can lead to the same functional outcome. And what we find actually is that it's sex differences in mate preferences seem to fall with the latter, and then overall standards seem to fall with the former, although I think perhaps I've reversed those. But yeah, so basically the takeaway here, I think, is that there are multiple routes to the same functional outcome, and especially in evolutionary research, it's important to check the assumptions that we're coming into research with, and test these different possible functional pathways that can lead to the same observed behavior. And it's important to remember that this manifest behavior is not necessarily reflective of a underlying psychology, so based on the assumptions that we're making. So with that, thank you to everyone who's also a co-author on this paper and has helped me with this project, and thank you to you guys for listening to this after lunch.
Great talk. I wanted to ask if you had your bisexual subjects grade their sexuality in a spectrum. That's what you're aiming for, if you just kind of street dive.
For the sake of these analyses, while we did ask them for just to report their identity and a term, for these analyses, what we did is we asked if they experienced a long-term attraction to men versus long-term attraction to women, and then short-term versus both. I have short-term results as well, but it's just too much stuff to get through in this talk. And if they reported long-term attraction to both men and women, then we included them as bisexual as this umbrella term.
Awesome work. Love some bisexual research. So we know from the bisexual discrimination literature that particularly heterosexual people are generally report an unwillingness to date bisexual people, or I guess to mate with bisexual people. And so I wonder if did you ask the question initially would you be willing to date this, and if you didn't in future research, do you think the responses would look different? I guess I'm just wondering if their mate preferences would look different if they initially said I wouldn't even want to date a bisexual.
Yeah, we didn't ask that for the sake of this talk, just because this really was just about comparing mate preferences overall between the two to show that we could make this generalization. I think it's definitely something we could add, because obviously if people are completely unwilling to date bisexual people, maybe the reported preferences aren't reflecting their actual preferences. But just for the sake of this study, we didn't do that.
Yeah.
So in study one, you reported bisexual participants' preferences for opposite sex partners compared to overall. Did you look at same-sex partners individually? Was there a significant difference there, or were they both? Was general and same-sex partners both?
I'm not sure I'm understanding. So are you asking? Because what we had them do was report their preferences for opposite sex and then for same-sex partners, and then we compared the two.
Yes. I thought the second one was a combination of both.
Cool. Okay, thank you guys.
All right, next we have Amber Chen. You can see, even though there's multiple people in this picture, which one is Amber, because there's one child. So just zoom in your mind's eye. Amber has actually had a long research career before she started grad school, and she was even awarded a grant as a co-investigator from the Research Grants Council of Hong Kong. And outside of her academic pursuits, she aspires to one day learn her mom's cooking, which I warn you will not be for the faint of heart. In her hometown, locals clamp plums with wooden planks and soak them in chili water before having them. So if you're invited to Amber's house for dinner, beware that you will probably need to take a day off from work. In the meantime, before learning cooking, Amber enjoys playing video games in her downtime, and she is in fact a decorated Splatoon player, which is a Nintendo Switch game for all the uncultured and uninitiated, where she holds rank X. I don't know what that means, but I think it's good. And perhaps a skill more useful to all of us is that Amber is exceptionally good at applying screen protectors. So if you ever need that, you don't need to go to the Apple store, just head to the Yes Lab. As you listen to her presentation, you might not be surprised to hear that if she weren't in grad school, she would be a programmer, as her research examines how conceptual knowledge derived from a decade of US web news using large language models and visual information influences social trait judgments. So please welcome Amber.
Hear me fine? Yeah. Thank you, Eva. I'm very lucky to follow Josh, Carlos, and actually talking about traits. I'm also talking about traits, but in a more straightforward way from faces. So I'm talking about when we see the faces, we not only see the faces. Raise your hand if you can recognize at least 3 of them in this selfie. Okay. Most of the hands raised up. And if you have heard me presenting this, probably you can also associate me doing this prompting. But most part, you might also associate this face with the news or the movies or the rumors they are associated with. So this is what I mean by when you see the face, you see it visually and also conceptually. Okay, so when we see the face, we not only process the faces pretty rapidly and also automatically, because the face carries a lot of information, social cues for us to make the trait attributions. So how we make judgment of social traits from the visual features? One possible way is the physical attribute. For example, the facial width to height ratio can be associated with the judgment of worthiness and the dominance, and the facial symmetry can be associated with the attractiveness ratings. More importantly, we process the familiar faces differently. For example, if we organize all the faces we have met in a map, maybe we have familiar faces and unfamiliar faces in the different ways of organization. For example, if you see the first person, you probably don't recognize him, and you see another person, if you recognize him or not, they probably will end up in the similar cluster if you don't recognize them, because they are all strangers. But if you can see the first person from the writers of the American Gods and the second person from the Wolverine, then you are able to tell them apart, that your brain is processing these two faces differently. So this means like not only we process the faces very quickly, we process the familiar faces even more quick. And like locationally, we have different parts of brains to process the familiar faces. Amygdala and hippocampus stores the social information and memories to help us to process the familiar faces. And why do we process the familiar faces differently? Here we promote dual route person perceptions models. So when we see the face, our brains is processing this not through the physical features, rather and to make the social trait perceptions, whether this person is warm, competent, or critical. And more importantly, what it makes it different for the familiar faces is we also carries the conceptual knowledge associated with the familiar face. So for the familiar faces, the physical traits physical features does not change, but the conceptual knowledge will have higher contributions. And here, for the conceptual knowledge, we mean the generalized knowledge acquired from our experience associated with one person. So here is a very big graph, but don't panic. It mainly means the how we organize the persons based on the physical features and based on the conceptual knowledge. For example, if we organize the persons based on the physical space, the axis and y-axis here does not mean anything. It just means how we put them in the map. Betty White and Michelle Obama can be like that. And in the conceptual space, it can be like this. However, if we compare them with Hugh Jackman, then you will be able to see for the physical space, Betty White and Hugh Jackman is more far away than them in the conceptual space. Probably is because they seem to be physically different. They are different genders, but conceptually they are both actors and actresses from the entertainment industry. So this is how we represent different persons in different ways. So here we focus on 3 research questions: whether the physical features and the conceptual knowledge contribute to our trait perceptions, and whether they contribute to our neuronal activities. More importantly, whether the familiarities are influencing these 2 contributions differently. So we have 12 participants undergoing brain surgeries, and we have the opportunity to plug the electrodes into their brains to collect the neuronal activities from the amygdala and hippocampus, where we can store the memories associated to persons. And the participants were performing the one back task, where they see the repeated faces, they press the button. So we have 500 images from 50 celebrity identities. From the larger sample, we also collect the social traits based on these 50 celebrities, whether they are competent, whether they are warm, whether they think they are critical to you. So the question is, how can we compare the data from different sources, the brain data, the behavioral ratings, and also we have the conceptual knowledge and the physical features that we try to test their contributions. We use the method called representational similarity matrix analysis, and this is a similar space. Let me walk you through it. So for example, we will have the first neurons responding to the celebrity number 1 and celebrity number 8. And we will have all the neurons responding to these 2 stimulus. And then we can have their correlations between these 2 stimulus. And by pairwise, we are able to construct a neural dissimilarity matrices to represent how the brains are representing these celebrities together. And we will have the feature annotations using the similar method. We have the ratings of whether they are pointing nose, over face, and sunglasses, and test their correlations. Using this, we are able to have the pairwise correlation matrices, where we call the behavioral dissimilarity matrices, and then we test the correlations between these 2 dissimilarity matrices. So the underlying assumption is that if the behavioral ratings can predict our neuronal activities or they are associated, then these 2 dissimilarity matrices should be highly correlated because they are under the similar structure. So from the neuronal activities, we will have the neural activities responding to each celebrities across the neurons. From the ratings, we will have the ratings across the celebrities for 8 traits. And then we will have the neural RDM and trait RDMs responding to each celebrities. Our task is to test how can we explain the neural RDM and trait RDM. The first one is the physical features. We will have the physical RDM, whether they have beard, oval face, pointy noses. And more importantly, we want to see whether the conceptual knowledge are contributing to these two RDMs. How do we do that? We have 10 years of web news, and then we extracted the news related to one celebrity, put all the sentences into a large language model called Berta, and then we are able to have the sentence embeddings for each celebrity. So this is just a way how can we generate the semantic representations from the news. So from all this vectorized representation, we were able to construct the similar RDM, conceptual RDM and the physical RDM, and then we want to see how the physical and conceptual RDM can contribute to the neural RDM and trait RDM respectively. So we used our variance partition analysis to see how the variance can be explained by the physical RDM and the conceptual RDM exclusively or overlap. This is all the 8 traits from the human ratings. Let me walk you through that. So the blue bar represent the conceptual RDM's contribution to the trait RDM, and the green bar represent the physical RDM's contributions to the trait RDM. So here you could see the physical RDMs like visually more dominant in the whole distribution. However, the conceptual RDM is also important in the variance. More importantly, if you see the patterns here, you might think the critical, competent, and practical charismatic seems to be higher than the feminine, strong, youthful, and warm trait ratings. This is just our theoretical speculations. Maybe for the physically reliant traits, for example, feminine, so the physical RDM will have higher contributions to the ratings. And the conceptually reliant traits, the conceptual knowledge will matter more. But we don't have the direct evidence for that, just our theoretical speculation for future direction. And we also have the neural RDM. We select different neurons based on whether they are more responsive to face, or they're not only more responsive to face, but also more responsive to identity. We replicate the patterns by which says that the conceptual contributions by proportion is even higher than the trait RDM here. What about the familiarity? We do the median split by the familiarity ratings, where we can see the familiar conceptual contribution, unfamiliar conceptual contribution marked by the darker or lighter bars. So for the competence competence ratings split by the familiarity, for the familiar conceptual contributions contributes a lot more than the unfamiliar conceptual contributions. And this pattern is pretty consistent across all the 8 traits. And we then again replicate this on the neural RDM. So for takeaways, conceptual information matters for our social trait ratings, for our neuronal activities, especially when the targets are familiar to us. So here we have the evidence supporting our dual route model, saying like we process the faces physically and conceptually, especially when the faces are familiar to us, conceptual knowledge will matter more. And we want to thank our collaborators and labs and STEM STEM faculties to give me suggestions, and especially for our friends. And hopefully when you see me or my collaborators' faces next time, you can think of this interesting topic. Questions?
So what are those neurons? I'm a little confused. Is it fMRI signal?
Is the Yes, it's a single neuron data. So we have the electrodes like in the brain. We can very precisely to record the neuronal activities. Not only like we have the temporal accuracies, and we also have the precise locations where and when the neurons fire the spikes.
So these are patients essentially?
Yes, they are ellipsis patients.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you have more questions, feel free to reach out to me.
I think Beza will win the award for looks the most like she did as a child because she looks exactly the same. Ageless. So closing MiniCon with a bang is Beza Dinch, who will discuss empathic accuracy in romantic relationships, for which Beza has received the SPSP Janessa Shapiro Graduate Research Award. Beza dreams of becoming a professor at her alma mater and having an office with a view, as UCSB grads think about having a view and a window a lot. Beza has always been an enterprising and determined individual. In 4th grade, she won the Best Invention Prize for a purse with an alarm system against theft. However, the alarm actually failed during the award ceremony. It's okay, sometimes demos don't work, but she promises that it did work. Beza speaks Turkish and German and would like to be a startup founder if she weren't in grad school. And actually, she did co-found a relationship well-being app called Relate, which reached thousands of downloads in Turkey. Despite her many talents and accomplishments, Beza's kryptonite is driving. Me too. And she's actually only driven 3 times since getting her license, and all 3 of those times ended with car damage. So luckily Beza will be walking down today, so we're all safe, and let's give her a big round of applause.
Can you hear me well? Thank you everyone for still being here after 2 long days. And we're almost there. But before, I would love to share the project I have been working on in the past 2 years, which focuses on the question of how romantic partners or close partners can improve each other's well-being. So let's start by thinking about the emotions we feel in a regular workday. If in a given day we complete a task from our to-do list, we will probably feel content and proud of ourselves. In contrast, if this day our experiment fails, we would probably be very upset or angry. Regardless of the values of these emotions, all of them exist actually for a reason. They help us to shape our behavior. So if you happen to come across a lion, hopefully not, but thanks to your fear, you'll be able to run away. And when it comes to social interactions, our emotions, emotional expressions communicate our internal states to other people. But does it mean that emotions should always be helpful? Actually, the answer is no. And when these emotions we experience on a daily basis, on a momentary basis, become extremely intense, or if they last longer than needed, they become harmful rather than helping us. And in this scenario, we need to manage these unwanted emotions in order to create adaptive responses to the environment. and we do so through a process called emotion regulation. Emotion regulation involves decreasing the intensity of emotions most of the time and changing the duration of them. And we use different strategies to achieve that. Two of them are listed here. In distraction, we divert our attention from the stimulus which evokes the emotion at the first place, and the appraisal refers to the process in which we change our perspective on a situation. As exemplified by these two strategies, traditionally emotion regulation has been studied as a personal process and largely ignoring the social aspects of it. However, oftentimes we know that we experience and manage our emotions when around other people, and luckily in the last decade there has been some growing interest in understanding these social types of emotion regulation. And in 2013, John Zeki came up with the definition of interpersonal emotion regulation, which occurs when a person attempts to change another person's emotions with a goal in their mind. This goal might be a benevolent one, such as improving the effect of the other person or mitigating their negative effect, but at the same time, this goal might be a malicious one as well, differing from social support literature actually. And for example, if you're sick and lying in the bed, if you want your partner to bring you a tomato soup, and after a few hours they came back with empty-handed, you would probably be very pissed, and you would want to make them feel guilty and bad, like you. Luckily, we know that the forward goal is much more frequently seen in close relationships especially. Although we can engage in interpersonal emotion regulation with anyone, we know that higher levels of disclosure is evident in close relationships. And people are actually disclosing or sharing their emotions with their close others much more frequently, and in return, these close others are expected to reciprocate these through helping them with their emotions. So in short, interpersonal emotion regulation is very prevalent in close relationships. But still, it doesn't mean that all interpersonal emotion regulation attempts are successful in relationships. There is some evidence showing that it sometimes may work well, and people feel a greater reduction in their stress when they are regulated by their partner. But there is also some contradictory evidence showing that sometimes your attempts may fail and even backfire. So an open question to answer, and we are also interested in that, how an effective interpersonal emotion regulation process looks like. According to the most fundamental theoretical model in the interpersonal regulation field, an effective IER is achieved through 3 stages. And the first stage is identification, which involves understanding the emotion of the other person. In the second stage, we select a strategy to regulate this emotion. And in the third strategy, we implement this strategy through using a more concrete tactic. So it seems like based on this theoretical model, if we fail to understand the other person's emotion at the first place, the other steps will fall apart and effective IER will be less likely. In other words, it has been theorized that empathetic accuracy is the first step of interpersonal emotion regulation. What is empathetic accuracy? So it is defined as one's ability to recognize someone else's emotional state. And it has been found to be linked to the amount and quality of support exchanged between married couples before. But however, up to date, we don't have any evidence focusing on the association between empathetic accuracy and interpersonal emotion regulation. To test this idea, we pre-registered our first hypothesis stating that empathetic accuracy will predict the effectiveness of interpersonal emotion regulation. Given the importance we assign to empathetic accuracy in this model, we also take a step back and we wanted to understand how people might be empathetically accurate in their relationships. And we argue that there are two pieces that composes empathic accuracy, and the first one of them is emotional clarity, which is a personal skill to understand one's own emotions clearly and being able to distinguish emotions from each other. Emotional clarity has been found to predict emotion regulation ability on an individual level, and it is also associated with successful emotion perception. Moving forward, the second piece that we believe is contributing to empathic accuracy is motivation. So people should be motivated to understand their partner's emotions to be empathically accurate in the first place. And we use their attachment as an indicator of their motivation in the relationship. So we use attachment framework frequently in the relationship research, and we most of the time use it to explain the dynamics of long-term committed romantic relationships. And we study attachment along two dimensions. The first dimension is attachment anxiety, which is characterized by excessive need for intimacy and excessive worry about abandonment and rejection. And the second dimension is attachment avoidance, and it is characterized by a desire to maintain independence and avoiding closeness, basically. So, jumping to our second hypothesis, we put these two new puzzle pieces into our model, and we hypothesize that emotional clarity, attachment avoidance, and attachment anxiety will predict empathic accuracy, which in return will predict effective interpersonal emotion regulation. To test these two hypotheses, we run 92 couples on Prolific, and we asked them to complete an online dyadic survey individually, actually. The mean age for our participants was around 40, and it seems like our sample was consisting of couples who are highly committed in their relationships with a relationship length a mean of 13 years. After both partners in a romantic relationship agreed to participate in the study, we randomly assigned one partner to the role of target, and the second partner was assigned as the regulator. So here are the instructions we gave them. Targets were told that imagine that you called your partner and started talking about your day. Below are short sections of what you said. In return, regulators were prompted, imagine that your partner called you and started talking about their day. Below are short sections of what they said. After they are given these instructions, we presented them with 4 vignettes, and 2 of these vignettes were positive, and other 2 were depicting negative scenarios. Here is an example vignette we used in our experiment. So here we are describing a situation in which target inherited a watch from their great-grandfather, and this watch stopped working at that day. To measure empathic accuracy, we first presented each participant with 8 emotions after each vignette, in total 32 emotions, and we asked our target participants to rate how strongly would you feel this emotion from 1 to 5. Whereas our regulators were asked to rate how strongly do you think your partner would feel this emotion from 1 to 5 on the same scale, but the target was asked about their own experience, whereas the regulators were asked about their perception of their partner's experiences. To calculate the empathic accuracy score, we subtracted the rating from target given by the target from the ratings given by the regulator and calculate the difference scores between these two. Then we took the absolute value of this difference score, reversed it, and we calculated the mean score across 32 emotions. So measuring effectiveness of interpersonal emotion regulation was a bit trickier. To do so, we relied on a consistent finding from literature which suggests that any support provision is effective as much as it matches what is needed and wanted by the target of the regulation.
In other words, we operationalized our dependent variable or effectiveness of interpersonal emotion regulation as the similarity between what is needed or desired by the target and what is given or provided by the regulator. And to collect data on this variable, we asked our target participants open-endedly about what would you like to hear from your partner to feel better in this scenario. And the regulators were asked, what would you tell your partner to make them feel better in this scenario after each 4 minutes? Their open-ended answers were rated by our arrays in terms of the correspondence between them, between two open-ended answers, from 1 to 4, 1 being no match at all and 4 being exactly the same match. So to make it more clear in your mind, I will show you some examples that we got from our participants actually. So in the first example, our target reports that I would like for him to give me confidence that my friend will pass the exam. And in return, the regulator tells them, like, I will tell them to take a deep breath and relax. So it seems like an off match, right? So there's usually no match between these two answers. And indeed, our arrays, they put this pair with a score of 1. A better example is here. So here the target reported that I would like to hear from my partner reassuring words so that everything will go smoothly and that I should have more confidence in myself. Here, similarly, they asked for confidence from their partner, and their partner told them I will make them feel confident and say that they worked hard and they are definitely qualified for the promotion and they deserve the best. So in here there's a good match there, and they got the score of 4 from our arrays as well. And again, we created a composite score for effectiveness of interpersonal emotion regulation among 4 vignettes. Since this methodology was newly developed by us for the purpose of this study, and there is no validity evidence, we moved forward and wanted to provide some validity evidence for this way of measuring our dependent variable. So first, we calculated an mean effectiveness score for our participants who are coming from the same couple, and we saw that we observed that mean effectiveness score was 2.64. Then we randomly paired answers coming from a target from a couple with an answer coming from the regulator from another couple, not the same couple this time. So the target 101 was matched with the regulator 126. And our arrays moved forward and calculated the second effectiveness score for the mean of these newly randomly paired couples. And their effectiveness score was 1.85 and was significantly lower than the mean score we observed with real couples. So it gave us some idea that it is not about the answers are not about the regulator being good in general, but it is more about the idiosyncratic knowledge between the target and the regulator. Going back to our methodology, our regulator participants are additionally asked to complete 2 self-report questionnaires to measure their emotional clarity and attachment orientation. Jumping to the results, we run a structural equation modeling path analysis to test the proposed model and to see if our model fits the data. And in line with our first hypothesis, we saw that empathic accuracy positively predicted IER effectiveness. And our results also partially supported our second hypothesis, and we saw that emotional clarity marginally predicted empathic accuracy, and attachment avoidance negatively predicted empathic accuracy as well. But we couldn't find any evidence for attachment anxiety. Overall, these results suggest that a person with high emotional clarity and low attachment avoidance tend to have a high empathic accuracy score, which in turn they will be able to give an effective interpersonal regulation to their partner. So here is the total model fit. So this was the first empirical evidence actually supporting the theoretical model I just discussed in a dyadic format and with a novel methodology. But like other studies, it was not free of limitations, and our biggest limitation was that we used hypothetical scenarios rather than naturistic setting. And secondly, we also acknowledge that the target participants we collected data from may not be aware of from which tactic they would benefit the most. To address these limitations, we designed and run a second in-lab study with an experimental design, and we tried to understand the causal effect of empathic accuracy on interpersonal regulation effectiveness. We started to run this study with romantic partners, but what we saw is it is not possible to manipulate the knowledge that people have about each other's emotions, so we failed to manipulate empathic accuracy with romantic partners. And for the summer, we are planning to run stranger diets instead of close partners to test the causal effect of empathic accuracy. We believe that these results extend the literature on interpersonal emotional regulation through connecting it with the findings from social support literature and close relationships literature. And we also believe that our results, which emphasize the role of motivation in empathic accuracy and effective regulation, can inform the recent advances in large language models research and can go beyond social psychology. That being said, I would love to thank my advisor, Dr. Shelley Gable, and all members of Amber Lab and Close Relationships Lab. And thank you as well for being here still after 2 long days.
So I was curious if you think that like the amount of time that somebody has spent in a relationship might be part of what could be contributing. Like maybe there are some people who, these predictive factors might be really important, or like they get into a relationship and they're just like really good at reading their partner and they know like exactly what they're gonna need because they have some of these predictive factors, whereas other people it might take them a little bit longer and they might have to like really get to know their partner and what they need. And so like maybe somewhere in between strangers and like close relationships where they've been together for 10 years might be something in between where it's like it might take them a little bit longer.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great question. Actually, we controlled for relationship length while analyzing the data, but still we know that this sample was like highly skewed in their relationship length, so it still can be the case in which the people who are in the beginning of their relationship will fail to understand their partner's emotions accurately compared to other people who are in a committed relationship. So it would be great to run a similar design with undergrad sample and to see like how relationship length may factor into this equation. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you thought about this in the context of like friendships, when you have more than one friend and you go into a relationship, different types of advice, even if it's not, like you don't, that's not necessarily you prefer being with a friend who gives you like the hard advice, being with a friend that's totally this is super comforting. And like what how that would work when it's not necessarily a forced diet where you have all these multiple options and getting different benefits from different types of like responses.
Yeah, it's a great question too, and I think it's a different question with an answer from the literature. So we also know that having a large social support network, like having a person that will support you beyond your romantic relationship, is going above and beyond the effect of having the close partner in your life for emotional regulation. So yeah, it's right. And when it comes to these results, I believe that they would be duplicated with friendship diets as well. It is not that different between romantic partners and friends, I believe. Yeah, we didn't collect any data about the personal stress in this study, but I think it makes perfect sense to like add this variable as well because yeah, I believe when people feel stressed themselves, it would be harder to like understand the other person's emotions accurately or in an objective manner. So yeah.
So, very cool. Thanks so much. I was wondering, like, given that it's so much work for arrays to code this, especially like many, many times.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried like looking into maybe like referring it with AI and seeing whether that correlates with the array score? And maybe then you can actually do much more large scale analysis.
Yeah.
Whether
I think it's a good idea for a future direction, but it is hard to collect data from couples in any case, so I'm not sure if we will be able to collect this large amount of data to use AI for the studying, but I completely agree with the fact that like our arrays worked a lot to code like hundreds of minute answers for these results.
Okay, let's give a big round of applause. Okay, and that concludes our MiniCon 2024. Don't leave yet, I have some closing remarks. MiniCon is always such a special time to get to come together and get inspired by all of the research that is so diverse going across our department. And what a journey it's been this time. We've learned about visual processing, mate preferences, accent discrimination, and even cocaine a few times. So we've learned a lot, and I want to just give a final huge round of applause to all our amazing second-year speakers for sharing their research with us. I also want to give a huge shout out to the folks in my third-year cohort who went above and beyond to make sure that this event was successful. Although this was a team effort, I do want to give a couple of specific shout outs. As other grads who've organized MiniCon in the past know, I think one of the biggest challenges is always getting all of the tech up and running. And Jocelyn led that effort so beautifully. She spent a lot of time dealing with the cameras, making sure that she's been sitting in that chair this whole time, although she's standing now, making sure that all of this was running. And I think we'll actually be able to access the streams forever. The YouTube links that were sent out, you can send those to your family if you want, look for yourself in the timestamp, and send those to people who weren't here. If you want to revisit your MiniCon talk at any time, maybe after a few months, once the stress has subsided, you can always do that as well. I also want to give a huge shout out to our co-chairs, Justin and Joanne, our fearless leaders. They were so dedicated, and truly we would not have pulled this off without them wrangling all of us, so thank you so much. I also want to give a big shout out to our Fantastic Four, Chris, Joe, Catherine, and Shane. Shane, please stand up. I think you're the only one who is here representing Fantastic Four. They gave us so much help behind the scenes, as they always do, but they helped us with the website, coordinated awards, dealt with invoices, and got us a lot of equipment, and we could not have done this without them, much like everything in our department, honestly. I also want to thank all of the faculty for their mentorship and guiding all of us students, but of course especially the second years through their research. I'm sure that everyone went through many hours of presentations and tweaks and changes. And I hope that everyone is so proud of the work that their students have done and how beautifully it's paid off. So thank you to faculty as well. Okay, final thank you is to all of you for attending and your thoughtful questions and for helping sustain our wonderful PBS community. So round of applause for everyone. And thank you for coming to MiniCon. And we can all go home now and celebrate. I hope all the second years go celebrate.